Hey, how's it going? And welcome back to Consuming Cinema, a show about making and pairing food and drinks from popular movies and TV shows. Today, we're making and pairing Pinot Noir with Ostrich from Sideways. If you haven't seen Sideways, it's a 2004 Alexander Payne film based on a 2004 Rex Pickett novel of the same name, which won the Oscar for Best Adapted Screenplay, and follows struggling writer and wine aficionado Miles, along with his best friend and washed-up actor Jack, who journey up the California coast to Santa Barbara's wine country to celebrate Jack's upcoming wedding. For a week full of fine wine tastings, a few rounds of relaxing golf, and some good food, like at the Hitching Post 2 restaurant, where they see a waitress Miles knows named Maya, whom Jack encourages Miles to pursue, but Miles rebuffs Jack by diverting attention to the Hitching Post menu.
I can also recommend the Ostrich Steak, very lean, locally raised.
The next day, Jack reveals to Miles that he's determined to have an affair before he gets married, with his eyes specifically set on a friend of Maya's, a local wine pourer named Stephanie, whose house they wind up going to, where Miles gets a chance to explain to Maya his deeply personal passion for his favorite varietal of wine,
Pinot Noir. Top-notch Pinot and Pinot's Pinot. Local Pinot.
Why are you so into Pinot?
I don't know. It's thin-skinned, temperamental, ripens early. It's not a survivor like Cabernet. Nah, Pinot needs constant care and attention. Only the most patient and nurturing of growers can do it. Only somebody who really takes the time to understand Pinot's potential can then coax it into its fullest expression. And then, its flavors, they're just the most haunting and brilliant and ancient on the planet.
But before we get to the Pinot, we first have to start our ostrich. Now, ostrich can sometimes be hard to find, but I ordered these ostrich fillets, which weigh about a quarter pound each, which I got sent directly to me through an online meat purveyor called Wild Fork, which, while not a sponsor, I would be open to having as one in the future if Wild Fork is out there watching. And with this ostrich, we are going to make a dish, which, while no longer served there, is actually from an old Hitching Post menu that I found online, consisting of an ostrich steak served with a cherry and peppercorn sauce, orzo pasta, and portobello mushroom. But before we start our ostrich, we're first gonna saute some veggies for our orzo pasta. So, to a small pan or saucepan, we'll add about a tablespoon of olive oil, followed by some chopped shallots, some of which we'll reserve for our sauce later. Then we're gonna add some portobello mushroom, also chopped, and we'll stir that in and allow those mushrooms to soften. I also added a bit more shallots, as well as a little bit more olive oil. Then stir that around again, and after a couple minutes, once those mushrooms have softened up, we are then going to take them off the heat and set them aside. And to make our orzo pasta, we will need a medium pot of water, which we will bring to a boil. And while that comes to a boil, I should mention that you actually want to start this orzo a little later in the process, around when we ultimately do our pan sauce. And once your water comes to a boil, we'll then add a cup of orzo pasta. Just make sure you don't burn your hand on the hot lid like I did, so use a glove if necessary. And we'll add our orzo to the boiling water, and you want to cook this orzo until it reaches al dente. And once that orzo becomes al dente, you want to take it off the heat and strain it. Now it's time to prep our ostrich. So first, we'll cover each of these ostrich steaks in a little olive oil, and then we'll season them both with a bit of salt, as well as some freshly cracked black pepper. And go ahead and season the other side as well. Then we'll add a tablespoon or so of olive oil to our pan, and once that pan is piping hot, which I tested by tossing a sprinkle of water into it, we will then put our ostrich steaks into the pan. And now you want to let these steaks sit untouched for about 2 minutes. Seriously though, don't touch them. Don't touch it! And the reason why we don't touch these steaks is so that they develop a nice hard sear and crispy crust. And after 2 minutes, we'll flip these steaks over and we'll see that we did indeed get that perfect looking crust that we were going for. Now we'll let the other side cook for 2 minutes as well, but this time we'll add a tablespoon of butter to our pan, which we'll use to butter baste the ostrich and instill some much needed fat into it. And don't worry if that butter starts looking a little dark, because we're gonna ditch it in a second anyways. Then, after 2 minutes, we'll take these steaks off the heat and we're gonna let those steaks rest for about 10 to 15 minutes at room temperature. And while we do, we're going to make our cherry peppercorn pan sauce by first discarding this grubby excess oil and butter from the pan. But don't worry about this extra bit stuck on the bottom of the pan, as this is called fond. And we're gonna use this fond to get more of that meaty flavor into our sauce, which starts with a little bit more olive oil into our pan, and then we're gonna add some more of those chopped shallots from earlier and give those a quick stir before adding some green peppercorns, which are commonly found in French cuisine that I strained the brine out of beforehand. Then stir that around again, and now we're gonna do a technique called flambeing by using some cognac or brandy, about a quarter cup of which we'll pour into the pan, and then very carefully tilt that pan slightly, which will ignite some awesome flames. And will also more rapidly cook out the alcohol content of the cognac whilst retaining its flavor. But don't fear, because we're gonna put out those flames by adding a half a cup of beef stock, followed by a couple tablespoons of cherry preserves, which is almost like a cherry jam. And we'll stir that in. Then we're gonna let that sauce reduce. And while we do, we're gonna add some freshly cracked black pepper. And after a quick taste, I added a little bit of salt, but don't add too much salt though. And stir that in as well. And then you wanna let this sauce continue to reduce into an almost syrupy consistency. You'll know it has reduced enough when you can coat the back of a spoon with it and wipe a clean line through the middle of the spoon. At this point, we will then add a tablespoon of butter, as well as a little bit of fresh thyme. It's important to add the butter at the end so as your sauce doesn't break. Breaking is when the fat separates from the rest of the sauce, creating a less cohesive final product and a much less attractive appearance. Then we'll give that sauce another quick taste, as well as another quick spoon test. And once your sauce is perfect, we're gonna take it off the heat and we'll strain that sauce into a separate container, for which you should technically use a sieve, but I used a basic strainer. Now it's time to head on over to plate. And as we can see at this point, our ostrich has fully rested, but before we cut into it, we're first gonna mix together our orzo pasta by adding it to a bowl, before then incorporating some of those sauteed shallots and portobello mushrooms, as well as some freshly chopped Italian parsley, in addition to a little bit of olive oil. And we'll toss that all together with 2 forks until it's all nicely incorporated. And now it's time to slice into our ostrich, which, like a regular steak, you want to cut against the grain. So we'll make some nice thin slices, and at this point you can see that our ostrich is a perfect medium rare, which is exactly where you want it to be, because if you overcook ostrich, it can become really tough. Now to plate our meal, we'll first make a nice mound of Portobello Orzo pasta in the center of the plate, and I shaped the orzo so that it was nice and even in order to create a lovely bed for our ostrich to rest in. And while I did, Bailey snuck a little taste. Then after tidying that up, we will add a few slices of our ostrich steak on top of our pasta and neatly layer those like so, after which we'll top our ostrich off with a thin spoonful of our cherry peppercorn sauce. And while I finish that up, let's talk Pinot Noir. Now, there's a very specific type of Pinot referenced in the movie, which is the Hitching Post's Highliner.
Highliner, please.
And is made by Harley Ostini Vineyards, which began as a collaboration between Hitching Post owner and chef Frank Ostini along with his friend and former fisherman Gray Hartley. To open our Highliner, we'll be using a simple waiter's corkscrew by first cutting off the foil around the lip of the bottle like so, and after we remove the foil, we will then insert the worm of the corkscrew into the center of the cork, and we're going to gently twist that corkscrew until there's one stanchion left. Then we will use the fulcrum of the corkscrew to pry the cork from the bottle. Now, unlike the last wine we covered on the show, a Pinot Noir does not need to be decanted and can be served immediately, which we'll do into a red wine glass like this one. So we'll pour some red wine into our glass, and at long last, your Pinot Noir with ostrich is finally done. Now there's nothing left to do but to taste it. So we'll start by cutting off a piece of our ostrich and getting a little bit of that orzo as well, and I gotta say, I am really blown away by this dish. Despite technically being poultry, the ostrich tastes almost exactly like filet mignon and doesn't have any of the gaminess that I was actually expecting. And it's beautifully complemented by the Portobello Orzo pasta, the rich earthiness of which goes perfectly with the similar flavors of the ostrich. Not to mention that cherry peppercorn sauce is absolutely killer and easily easily one of the best things I've ever made on this show, and I'm honestly pretty proud of the simple yet elegant balance of this meal. But how does our ostrich pair with Pinot Noir? Well, quite honestly, this is genuinely one of the better pairings on the show, and that's because the fruity, acidic cherry notes of the Pinot go perfectly with the similar notes from our cherry peppercorn sauce. Not to mention that there's a bit of an earthy quality from the Pinot that likewise complements the ostrich and the mushrooms rather exquisitely. So naturally, these two are a match made in heaven. So if you're hesitant about trying ostrich, you really shouldn't be, because it's truly fantastic and a much healthier, albeit slightly costlier alternative to beef if you happen to be looking for one. This dish was so incredible, in fact, that it's actually the only meal I've ever made on this show that I loved so much that I ate the entire thing on camera. So not only is this one of the best meals I've ever made, but it's also a perfect pairing with Pinot Noir. That said, whatever you do not, under any circumstances, pair this dish with the Merlot.
If anybody orders Merlot, I'm leaving. I am not drinking any fucking Merlot!
So it goes without saying that I'm giving this pairing 2 big thumbs up. If you like the channel, please like, subscribe, and hit that notification bell. Please leave any video suggestions in the comments below. Full recipes will be included in a link in the video description. Follow us on all forms of social media at Consuming Cinema. And don't forget to join us next week when we make a pairing from Birds of Prey and the fantabulous emancipation of one Harley Quinn. And as always, thank you for watching.